Thank you. We'll just go ahead and enforce that. Need to call this work session to order. If everybody will take their seats, please. We're going to be busy for the next hour and a half. I want to do ABU first. About the first 45 minutes, then we'll switch to ML and K. That's all right. Well, Mr. Mayor, how are you?
Very good, Mr. Chairman.
So let's go around the table and have everybody identify themselves for the record. We are on the tape.
Harriet Drummond, Assembly.
Ernie Hall. Bill Starr.
Jody Oceander. Jennifer Johnston.
Dan Sullivan, Mayor.
Dick Trainey.
Mike Gutierrez.
Paul Holmes.
Okay. Miss Gray Jackson's here somewhere.
Yeah, she's right here somewhere. So, AWU, come on up to the table and let's talk about this. I understand most of your board members are here.
Most are.
Good.
George Vacalis, representing the municipality, is here. Richard Davis from Alaska Regional Hospital, Chief Operating Officer, is here. Who else? Anybody else here? Of course, Mark Primo's here, and staff from AWU is here. I'm Tim Sullivan. I'm the chair of the Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility Board of Directors. To my right is Butch West, noted engineer in this community and vice chair and member of the executive committee. And to my left is Jordan Jacobson, recently retired senior executive vice president with Alyeska Pipeline and general counsel for Alyeska Pipeline. And
welcome.
Excuse me, I'm a little winded. I've just recovering from a bout of upper respiratory.
I thought maybe your brother's making you run up and down the stairs or something to get up here.
He makes me so nervous. So if you please pardon my gasping pauses here, I would appreciate it. First, we're here in response to the efforts to repeal Title 31 of the Anchorage Municipal Code. And first, I'd like to read a letter in that I'm sure has been sent to all of you, but I'd like to read it into the record as well. And then have it. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to do that, and then make a few comments, and then have Mr. Jacobson make some comments, and have Mr. West make some comments. And
that's fine. We've got 45 minutes.
Okay. And if there are any technical questions that you have, that we'll certainly try to answer those. And if not, we've got staff backing us up to do that as well. So certainly appreciate your time and look forward to discoursing here with you. This is a letter addressed to Mr. Flynn and of course copied to the rest of the Assembly. And if I could commence, thank you for your letter discussing your proposed legislation repealing Title 31 and Title 32 and introducing the concept of an Enterprise Activity Oversight Committee. The Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility Board has carefully reviewed the proposed legislation and your letter. As you requested, we are providing our comments and advice through this letter, which represents the consensus of the board. And that doesn't mean it's unanimous consensus, it just means it's a consensus, okay? Our executive committee will also make a presentation at the March 4th work session and will be available to answer questions. We limit our comments and advice on the impacts of the proposed legislation to AWU because that is our charge and our expertise. We agree that AWU faces dramatic change in the coming years, including heightened regulatory requirements, infrastructure replacement, and resulting rate impacts. We understand that to make good policy decisions, the Assembly must be fully informed about the issues and workings of AWU. We also agree that separation of politics from management decisions is important for highly regulated utilities like Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utilities. We must provide service through a defined regulatory structure. Your letter discusses the present quasi-independent structure provides a separation of politics and management decisions. We agree with your view and believe we have effectively administered AWU in just that manner. Indeed, that was the vision of the Assembly when it created Title 31. The Assembly's decision nearly 6 years ago to create Title 31 has been successfully implemented to the benefit of the community and municipality of Anchorage. As the board of AWU, we have spent thousands of man-hours engaged in the issues of AWU and providing for operational and management oversight as required by Title 31. The public health implications, the large capital investments in infrastructure, this is a $7.5 billion operation here. It's the single largest asset the municipality has. And the unique regulatory requirements require this level of commitment from the board. We understand the goals of finding further efficiencies in government by integrating the utilities with general government. We believe that AWU is efficient in working with general government. We acknowledge that the working relationship on ad hoc occasions has not been perfect, We know that AWU consistently works with the other MOA enterprises in general government to be as efficient as possible in coordination with all other aspects of municipality banking. Our expertise is that real efficiencies are gained by improving business practices. AWU has consistently led and participated in the development of improved practices that have been adopted by general government and other MOA enterprises. The AWU board takes into account all the public health and economic impacts when making its decisions for AWU. Consistent with Title 31, the board functions as a fiduciary body. With that fiduciary responsibility comes the expertise and commitment necessary to effectively oversee the operations and management of AWU. Moving from the Title 31 board to the proposed advisory commission will not have the result you so desire and discuss in your letter. The board does exactly what you have asked. Budget decisions are made in a sober and unbiased review. An advisory commission cannot make decisions because it is neither empowered to do so, nor does it have the responsibility to do so. Finally, we note that the proposed repeal of Title 31 and Title 32 assumes the same issues exist for both utilities, and that is in whole or in part the basis for the repeal. We do not believe the two utilities face the same challenges or potential changes. Electric utility issues are very complex and political, and because of the nature of the electric utility business in South Central Alaska and the state. ML&P must operate and adjust its business within that paradigm. On the other hand, AWU is a local provider of water and wastewater services. It does not have competitors and interface challenges with other water and wastewater providers. We are a true monopoly in this community. Nor are the same or comparable political issues present. The organizations, their missions, and their issues are fundamentally different and should be treated as such. We request that the debate and vote on the repeal of Title 31 and 32 be split. You asked for our advice. We recommend amending the concept of a single oversight committee responsible for all 5 enterprise functions to one dedicated specifically to AWU. This committee could work with the board during the annual budget process, providing opportunity for timely guidance from the Assembly and education on utility finances and operations. This concept could be expanded to other issues the Assembly is concerned about through quarterly meetings with an oversight committee, or if necessary, the entire Assembly and the board. This process can be codified within Title 31. The Mayor's office is represented on the board by a member chosen from his staff, and that level of coordination has proven to be very successful. We feel very strongly that repeal of Title 31 is the wrong approach. We understand your issues, and we want to work with the Assembly to meet the needs of the community and ratepayers. We look forward to this work session and any other processes that the Assembly believes appropriate. And that's a letter that was sent to the Assembly, and I hope everybody received that. If not, then I've just read it to you.
Thank you.
Just a few comments. I don't come before the Assembly lightly. I never have and never will. I consider this to be a very, very important issue in this community, and that the independent nature of Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility, I think, is very important for this community. I've been a follower of water and sewer for many, many years, and really from the days when I was going to University of Alaska Anchorage out here, and Buckminster Fuller showed up and I lectured for a whole day. And one of the things that I walked away from was that waste is the biggest single problem that we've got in facing us as a human being in this world right now. And so I've always been part of that, and always been enthralled by how that process has developed and continues. I grew up in a community in Fairbanks till I was 11, where the water was so hard you could skate on it. And we didn't have fluoride in the water, and I think we were lucky to even have chlorine in the water. And in 1959, when we moved down here, my mother exclaimed, "Oh my God, we're coming to fluoride." And she was so tickled about that because she knew, as I found out years later, that dental costs are not an inexpensive item. And, the first three or four of us, we didn't have fluoride. And so as a result, we paid the price for that. And this utility not only provides the public health concerns through fluoride, but also you don't see outbreaks of cholera in this town. You don't see outbreaks of E. coli. You don't see outbreaks of diseases in this town because we have an operation that is probably one of the best in the country. And it keeps the water safe, and it keeps the sewer out of our basements, and it keeps the sewer running into an efficient system. This ordinance comes to us as a shock and a surprise. None of us on the board were consulted by anybody on the Assembly prior to the implementation of this ordinance, or to the introduction of this ordinance. The introduction of this ordinance. And again, we're still kind of in shock by it because we have not really had any conversation with anybody in the assembly with regards to this. And this board is in charge of the utility. You know, we pass our information back to the mayor, we pass our information back to the assembly, but you know, the management, the day-to-day operation and management of this organization is done by this board. And we put in thousands and thousands of man hours over the years, about almost 6 years now, to make those transitional changes that were required in the initial Title 31. And some of those accomplishments are, first off, it's a long-range financial plan. There wasn't a long-range financial plan prior to this board coming into existence. There is one now. That long-range financial plan deals with the capital improvement program. It also deals with rates and looking at long-term changes in rates, long-term changes in capital programs. We've now got an asset management program that wasn't in existence before, that has gone through every asset of the utility to determine what its value is. We also, as part of that, developed a risk assessment program that now tells us how to prioritize those assets for repair and rehabilitation and replacement. We've also set up a purchasing program that has increased the efficiency of our abilities to deal with contractors tremendously. Yeah, the backlog when it was with the municipality was more than was necessary for Anchorage Water and Wastewater Utility. And what's left of what our transition plan is personnel. It's really one of the last things that we have to do is to basically codify within AWU our personnel policies. We do not agree with repeal of it, but we would certainly agree to some amendments of it to make it more streamlined. I don't think it's healthy to throw it all out completely because we have done a good job. And again, this board has put in thousands of hours over the last nearly 6 years now to help this happen. I'd like to turn it over to Jordan Jacobson, and if you've got questions, that's fine. If you'd rather wait until all three of us are done.
Jennifer, you're going with the question right now. Do you want to wait until the two are done?
I can wait.
Okay. Why don't you just continue and let's get from both of them, and then we have some questions.
Okay, good. And thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to meet and talk about this important issue. I've not met before the Assembly before, so this is new. I don't know your protocols. I apologize if I step on any of them. To introduce myself, my name is Jordan Jacobson. I'm a lifelong, born and raised resident of Anchorage. Indeed, my father actually worked for the old borough and the city. He's been retired for over 20 years now, but so I have kind of a connection back to these kinds of issues back to my childhood. Until February of this year, I was a senior vice president and general counsel for Alaska Pipeline Service Company. Retired, and now I'm a management consultant for them. I've held that position for the last 9 years. I have extensive knowledge in the regulatory environment and the operational environment for pipelines, and you'll be surprised how similar they are to wastewater utilities. So I have extensive knowledge with the Regulatory Commission of Alaska and replacing infrastructure and that kind of thing. So my job wasn't just as a lawyer, but also as an executive manager of the company. I thought I'd give you I've been on the board about a year. I thought I'd give you my views on what I've seen of the utility and its operation, because I think coming in as relatively new with the kind of background I have is informative. So first talk about operations, then talk about the challenges, and then talk a little bit about governance and efficiency. So again, I want to point out there's some striking similarities between sort of TAPS and AWWU. If you read the newspaper, you hear about TAPS and you hear about low flow and you hear about all the challenges of keeping an old pipeline going. That's the same issue in a lot of ways for AWWU. You've got an aging infrastructure that has life cycle replacement. And that's a big, huge issue for this utility, as well as essentially a flat income stream. There's not real strong growth in the community, so the rate base is in a sense fixed relative to an increased burden on infrastructure costs. So I just want to point out those are similarities I saw right off the bat, and I thought I've got a lot of experience dealing with that. When I looked at the operations and management of the utility, I really thought coming in from the private sector with my experience, I would really have significant input in terms of making sort of policy and management suggestions. I'll have to tell you, I was surprised and impressed by the operation of this utility. It is extremely well run. Indeed, on sort of performance indicators or benchmarks, it meets and beats the oil industry on a lot, not most of them. And the oil industry prides itself in meeting its benchmarks. So you've got a highly well-run utility right here. I thought I'd go through just a few of those standards to impress you with what I mean by that. So safety doesn't get talked a lot about in the public so much as it does in business, but this utility has safety performance that is extraordinary. And it's dangerous business. We're talking about digs in the summer and the winter. We're talking about big piping jobs. We're talking about jobs within facilities. And yet the safety record is exceptional. And, you know, when you have good safety, then you've got good efficiency and effectiveness. Those have to go hand in hand. So you know you've got an effective and efficient run operation when you've got a safe operation. The other area I really thought that I would make some significant comments on coming in was around engineering performance. But I was very impressed with their engineering performance program. And their scheduling is good, their cost management is good, their selection of contractors is effective. I was impressed. I really thought this is an area where I'll have something to say. And yet the engineering program is running very well. Project execution was an area where I thought, if anything, this is where the private sector is going to do a lot better. I was real impressed. Project execution here is very well done, very coordinated with engineering. And frankly, they're at the state of the art. They've taken asset management, which is really the state of the art in project execution, and incorporated it into their business on a number of fronts, but that plays out particularly in project execution. So, given the type of work they do, and the fact that they've got an asset management run operation, they're doing very well. Can they keep improving along that? There is an improvement line they're definitely on. So there is room for improvement there, but they are doing very well. Planning, I think they do really well on planning. And a part of that has to do with the fact that they're now in an asset management model. So the planning is going well. I think there's always a little room for improvement in planning, but when you look at it, that actually gets more impacted around the budget issue than it does the actual true planning. So that's something we could talk about a little bit more. Budget management on day-to-day and on the annual basis is extremely good. It's very tight. To me, the challenge on budget management is long-term planning for this facility. And that gets back to aging infrastructure, life cycle replacement, project planning, and ultimately rates. And we'll talk more about that later. The management team, Mark has a great management team. The spirit, the expertise, the competence, very, very high. You know, I have to tell you, when I was with Alieska and I looked at this team, I thought, you know, it'd be a conflict of interest for me, but I wouldn't mind hiring a couple of these people away. or more than a couple. I mean, it's just an exceptional team. You're very fortunate to have a management team at this utility of this quality. That's kind of where I consider the key indicators of performance are coming from the industry. What are the challenges? Well, the challenges really are around the infrastructure, because you've got a lot of it. Where it was inherited and brought into the utility. It's quite old. And you're into life cycle replacement. So that's a challenge. And the challenge is, and we dealt deliberately with this with Alieska, is that when you delay, you build a bow wave of life cycle projects. And that's the real problem that this utility faces over the next 10 years, is not getting into that bow wave. And right now, the planned out life cycle replacement that they've got is reasonable, in my opinion. But the challenge will be not to have that bow wave. Because then what happens is you get inefficiencies and you get costs and you get a big jump. And then how do you manage your way through that resource-wise? That is the big issue for this utility. And one that is important to the utility, important to the community, and certainly important to you as the assembly. So, what's the real... That's a real fundamental physical challenge. It's also a budget challenge. And I think that's, and I'm not going to still put your show here, but where your challenge is, where the utility's challenge is around rates, because The rates are set by the RCA. They don't have the same perspective on life cycle replacement, on a bow wave of projects, on the costs that are associated with that. They just don't. So we've got a disconnect between what we need to do as a utility in terms of life cycle replacement and how the rates are being set. That is a fundamental issue. You know, if I had one thing to say here, and again, I don't want to steal Butch's show, it'd be get out of being regulated by the RCA. That's the best financial thing you could do. I'll leave the rest of that for Butch. Governance model. I think the model works pretty well. In the year that I've been with the utility, I think it functions pretty well. Certainly on the day-to-day and on the annual basis. I do believe that over the long haul, there needs to be more interaction between the board, the management team of the utility, and the assembly. And that's because of the very issues I pointed out. The significance of your life cycle replacement and the challenge around the conflict with that on rates is a policy issue larger than the utility and is significant enough that the assembly needs to play in that space. So I sort of looked at the management structure and compared it to the one I'm familiar with. And if you look at TAPS, you've got the operator as Alyeska, you have the TAPS owners as essentially the board, not unlike the board for the utility, and then you have the large parent organizations that oversee a much larger portfolio than does the pipeline. In other words, the large international oil companies. In a sense, that's kind of what we have here, and I think it should work well. It should work well. Now, there are some disconnects, and those are the things we need to work on, but the fundamental breakdown in terms of where the responsibility lies, in terms of the level of detail and the level of policy, actually, this is a pretty good construct. The management team, the board, and the assembly, and the mayor, obviously, excuse me. So, I don't view the proposed change in the proposed legislation as necessarily solving the problems that I read about in the sort of preamble material that was put out, as well as the letter from Mr. Flynn. Because in my experience, that's sort of like assuming that the change in the model will solve the problem. But if the problem is more interaction by the assembly and more efficiency, then we need to look at that first and then decide what the fix is. Instead, we're trying to assume that fix is going to solve these two problems. I don't see that necessarily working. In my experience, if we're going to look at efficiencies, we form a task force of the right people and look at efficiencies across the MOA and the enterprises. Not just jump to, let's change the governance model. Because we don't know that that's going to work. We haven't studied that. It might, but we don't know. Let's wait to see what they would say. In terms of governance, I've already kind of said my main point there, which is I think there needs to be more communication between the board and upper management of AWWU and the assembly. That to me is more of a reporting relationship and more definition around that. That happens when you've got layers. Sometimes the ebb and flow doesn't quite work out right. You get a little disconnect. So then you need to revisit that and tighten things up. You can do that formally, you can do that informally. Obviously, as a governmental body, it would be better to be done formally. So that's my thoughts on that. Finally, I can't help but remind you all that this is a regulated utility. So there's a big player out there. That's the RCA. And that has an impact on the flexibility, the freedom, in terms of what the utility can do, what the assembly can do, in terms of constructs with respect to governmental organizations as well as efficiencies, because there are rules around how that works, and we don't need to go into the details of that now, but suffice it to say they're out there. So I guess if I boiled it all down, I'd say that I think this deserves a little more study than just taking action. And there's definitely some areas for improvement, but I don't know that the proposed action is going to get the results that you want. So that's my 10 cents.
Thank you. I've got some assembly members that are lining up for questions. So you're the next one. Can you do it in 5 minutes so I can leave 15 minutes for some
Can I do
questions?
mine in 5 minutes? I'll go really fast.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just trying to do with the time we've got to get this done.
Okay, I'll just skip the introduction. Other than say I'm a longtime Alaskan Anchorage resident, and I have a lot of experience in utility matters, including being responsible for the early day developments of the sewer utility that's now part of AWW when it was with the borough. And what I want to talk mostly about today is rates and some huge impacts on rates that will probably, to me, they're scary, and I think they will be scary to you as well. And we've concluded that rates are really the driving issue for the repeal of Title 31, which is the proposed ordinance you're discussing. And let me just say that future rates are inevitable. Future rate increases are inevitable, and they will be significant. I want to have Brett hand out some information, and I'll walk through it fairly quickly. And I'll wait till that gets passed around.
Go ahead. Good.
Well, and I'm handing these slides out because I think it'll be easier for you to follow me. I have a little PowerPoint thing that I'm talking from, and we chose not to put it up on the screen. But the first slide is titled Sobering Facts. And right now, the current capital assets of the utilities combined, 50% of them are contributed plant, which means that they were either funded by state and federal grants, but mostly by private development. So as the community expanded and land was developed, the developers built the water and sewer systems that were ultimately turned over to the utility. And they're carried on the books, and there's special significance about them as contributed plant. But AWW is responsible for maintaining these and ultimately replacing them when they're in their useful life. And when they are replaced under the current methods, they will become non-contributed plant, which puts them in a whole other category for rate-making purposes. Okay, the second slide you see kind of reiterates the contributed and non-contributed plant. But if you look at the whole utility infrastructure as a whole, right now, based on 2009 dollars, there's a $7.5 billion replacement program that needs to be done. That's in today's dollars. And this is based on an average service life of 65 years. Now, I'd like to point out that the $7.5 billion would be, when accomplished, if it was in today's dollars today, would increase the net current book value of $911 million to $7.5 billion. A huge increase. And right now we're on a replacement cycle, not for the 65 years, but for the water utility it's 134 years, and for the sewer utility 270 years. So we're really not going as aggressively as this would suggest. And I'm sure in other prior briefings you've seen the Nessie curves, which demonstrates this power wave, as Jordan talked about, future huge increases out in the future. So, but let me just there's a little example here I want to walk through as well that kind of shows you very simply what the impact is of replacing infrastructure, both non-contributed plant and contributed plant. So in this example, and it's just an illustrative example, there's $1 million non-contributed plant in place, and there's a $1 million contributed plant in place, and the decision is made that they both need to be replaced. And on the books for the original construction, the rate base, based on the non-contributed plant, is $1 million, because that was the book value when it was put in place. The rate base for the contributed plant is zero, because you can't count contributed plant as part of your rate base. So it has a total rate base in that scenario of $1 million. And then just assume that these two sections of pipe have to be replaced for $4 million, because that's the cost of putting U-pipe in today compared to when they were put in 25, 30, 50, 100 years ago. So now your replacement value becomes $8 million, and your new rate base becomes $8 million, which is a net change of $7 million. So you now have a 700% increase just for these two little projects in your rate base. And what does that do? It impacts MUSA, it impacts depreciation, it impacts your rate of return on rate base, and all those things are going on. And as this infrastructure is replaced, those costs are going to have to be incurred, particularly in the model that is provided, that we have to live by from the RCA. And another interesting point about this is that this kind of things has been going on, and some of this has been absorbed by the fact that there's been tremendous growth in the community over time. But now customer growth is flat. There are not many more new customers coming in. Actually, projections like 0.25%. So that means when these costs come along, there are not new customers that they can be appropriate over. They have to be absorbed by the existing customers. So the whole point of this discussion is this utility and this administration and this assembly, no matter how you organize yourself, no matter how you manage it, is going to be faced with huge rate increases. It's just inevitable. And giving you that scare tactic, I want to offer something else, and it was kind of alluded to by Jordan. But, a positive action the Assembly could take to address all of this is to move for deregulation. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Anchorage water and wastewater utilities, the water and wastewater utilities, are the only municipally owned regulated utilities in the state of Alaska. And there's a reason for that. I can answer any questions I want now. And not only that, it's one of the very few municipally owned water and wastewater utilities that are regulated in the entire United States. And that can be changed, and it can be changed very easily. The state legislature can, through an enactment of a bill, declare that these two utilities are no longer regulated. And that avenue has been attempted in the past. Management from the utility has gone down to Juneau and asked for it. The people from the administration has gone down and asked for it. And the pushback has always been, where is the Assembly on this issue? You know where the Assembly's been on this issue? Nowhere. There's never, ever been any kind of initiative from the Assembly to suggest that that should happen. And my suggestion is that if the Assembly took a strong stance on deregulation, it would happen. And what are the benefits of that? Well, the biggest benefit would be you, the Assembly, would now become in control of the rate-making process. You wouldn't have to follow the investor-owned utility model that the RCA imposes on this utility, which doesn't fit very well. And you could make decisions about how things are done in a much different way than following this very arcane and rigorous methodology for doing it.
I hate to interrupt you, but we've got to.
I got two more questions. Very
Okay.
quick. Okay. This would also save roughly $1 million a year, which is the cost of actually just being regulated and doing things. And it would give you opportunities to really manage some of the things that are really important to you, like MUSA, Mutual Uncontributed Plant, however you want to handle it, and dividends. I think I'll just close with that.
Thank you.
I have conclusions, but
We've got lots of questions. You guys have been busy.
I'll pass on the.
Mr. Mayor, I need your point of view.
Well,
on
I'll go
this issue.
last, Mr.
Okay.
Chairman. I know assembly members
No
have
problem.
questions.
Jennifer, you're first, ma'am.
First of all, thank you. One of the, as you know, one of the elements of this ordinance is economy of scale. Have you looked at other communities with similar situations to see how other models are and how we relate to that with other wastewater, water utilities? Do you have any idea?
I don't personally, do you?
Well, I can say this, and I know from experience, and Mr. Primo can probably address it much better than me, that when Title 31 was first being considered, there was a significant process that they went through to evaluate which was the best governance models for municipally owned utilities. And they picked, I believe it was 10 that they focused on, and then took the best ideas out of those 10 and crafted what became the ordinance to create Title 31. Art, do you want to expand on that?
Mr. Johnson, real quick, it was about a 10-month process where the advisory commission was heavily involved. We actually looked at approximately 20 utilities around the nation, identified the best governance model, and that was a regional authority, usually under state guidelines, state statute, where you have many cities in one jurisdiction, so the state had to be the
So what was
authority.
the size of those utilities? Were they comparable size, bigger, smaller?
All the above.
Okay.
And it was decided that the regional model, authority model, was the best. Some were elected, some were not elected. We then had advisory commission members that actually went and visited some of those utilities. We developed questionnaires and interrogatories between those utilities, and in conjunction with the existing advisory commission and discussions with the municipal attorney, the municipal manager, and the administration at the time, we developed a profile that we thought was the best fit organizational structure for this city.
Okay.
In terms of an independent authority. The one critical decision that was made was, do you go all the way being defined as like ATU did and become a really independent authority, change charter?
Yes.
The decision was made, we didn't want to change charter, so we stepped away from that.
So my next question is, you've come a long ways in 6 years, and I commend the board for that. Where I'm somewhat confused is it the makeup of the board that has brought the utility to that point? Is it the management of the utility itself? Or was it the function of Title, I can't remember which, 31 is why you did it? I mean, why as advisors would you have not have done what you've done as opposed to being in the board that you're in now? What changed? I mean, all of you seem very capable, and all of you seem like you're spending a lot of time working with the utility. Would you not have done it if you're in an advisory role?
Would not have, no. No, there would have been no direction. First off, there would have been no Title 31 that gave us direction on how to make those transitions. First, to develop a transition, and then to implement those factors as part of the transition. Secondly, you kind of almost answered your own question there, because the Assembly, decided that Title 31 was going to pass. The management was very much involved in not only educating the board, but also listening to the board and the expertise of the professionals on that board. Say, this is what we want to see happen. This is what the guidance is from Title 31. So that's where we're at.
And you don't feel, I mean, we're at a little bouncy ball right now, back and forth. You don't feel you as people would have given the same guidance to the management?
As an advisory board?
Yeah.
We would not have had the power to do so.
Can I explain on that?
And go ahead, Butch.
I'd like to answer both questions. First, I can tell you from my personal point of view as a board member, and I'm the longest sitting board member at this point, that the fiduciary responsibility given to me as being a board member really changes how I view it and how much I'm willing to put in effort and energy to doing this. And I know from my own personal aspect, that would go away if I was not in that fiduciary role. But there's another part of the question I want to answer as well. Where did all these changes, and what was the impetus, where they came from? It was a combination of good initiatives from the general manager and his staff, but equally so, there was a lot of emphasis from the board. And I can absolutely tell you that the board made Mark Primo and his staff go in directions that they didn't want to go, but they acquiesced to our demands to do that as a board.
If we, and this is my last question, I'm sorry, but if we didn't take the approach that we're taking right now with this ordinance, and instead worked with the ordinance to come up, I mean, to me, it's an economy of scale. We're trying to build in efficiencies within a very small government for a very small city. I mean, I don't want to undermine what we do here, but we're not a big city and we're not a huge population. And duplication of services throughout our government here is costly. If we were to address it in a different situation where we were asking more for coordination between AWW and the municipality and the school district and whatever we have under our umbrella, what would your approach be? As far as participating in HR, IT, management services?
I guess I don't fully understand the
I'm
question.
just saying,
This, as a utility, we work towards efficiencies every single day.
right,
And when we were given the authority, the board, and under Title 31, that was one of our major charges, was
Right.
to establish those efficiencies.
what I'm saying is that sometimes as a whole, we have more efficiencies than we do as different
I'm
segments.
gonna move. I've got-
We'll
Go ahead,
move on,
Jordan.
we'll
Go ahead,
move on.
Jordan.
Thank you. Harriet, you're next.
Mr. Chairman, I think we had an answer coming, though. I'd like to hear it.
Go ahead, we're running out of time.
So real quickly, my answer would be, it's not the ordinance, it's it's gonna do it. It's basically the management at the upper management level within the MOA and the enterprises, that if you wanna do that efficiency, you've gotta drive that directively as opposed to organizationally. So you gotta get management together and say, we wanna find more efficiencies. We want you to look at it. This is the construct we want you to look at it under. And we want your feedback in 3 months on how to do that with recommendations. Let's see, get out there and get it done. And we'll see from that management team where the opportunities for efficiencies are within the MOA, the enterprises, including this one. I mean, to me, that's how I do it.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer, Harriet?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, I have sort of a conflict here, but sort of not. I am the president of the Roaming Park Improvement Company, which is a small water utility inside AWWU's service area near Spenard and Fireweed. It serves about 100 properties, including the Sunrise Bakery, but we also pay AWWU for sewer services, so I have an interest on both sides. Our little utility took itself out from under APUC's, then APUC, now RCA's purview in the 90s because they tried to tell us we couldn't raise our rates. However, that requires a whole lot more attention to be paid by the board of directors and management and so on. And we're small and we're volunteer and all of that. So I appreciate what you said about getting us out from under the RCA entirely. On the other hand, it almost sounds like we need to develop a relationship like the Assembly has with the school board. I ran into Mr. Sullivan a couple of weeks ago, and he told me the $7.5 billion in assets figure, and it just kind of blew my mind, which is about 4 times what the school district owns in buildings, okay? We have quarterly meetings. The Assembly has quarterly meetings with the school board. We have a much more interactive relationship than we do with you folks. And I really appreciate that you've come before us to tell us these issues. And I can tell you, I think I can say right off the bat why you aren't seeing the Assembly asking for RCA regulation to go away. That would require a whole lot more work on the Assembly's part. And unless we're willing to do that and set it up in a different way, I don't see that happening. But I appreciate that is the direction that you recommend that we go. So thank you.
Elvie?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought that there were jokes before me. But anyway, first off, I want to thank you, all 3 of you, for your presentation. It was very, very well done. I'm not surprised that you gave Mr. Primo and his staff kudos, because I'd like to give them kudos also for a job well done. Thank you, folks. And I was really, really glad that you presented to us the good, the bad, and the ugly. And from what I heard, the good is that the utility is operating well and they have very, very good staff. The bad is that we need to have better interaction with the board and management and the Assembly. And the ugly is the rate increase. You refer to it as scary. And I appreciate the fact that you talked about deregulation and the Assembly's involvement. And the Mayor, you may or may not want to answer this question now, Mr. Mayor, but how do you feel about deregulation? I'd really like to know what your opinion is.
That's a little off topic, but let's focus on the bills in front of us. We'll get you an answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Paul?
Well, mostly been said, but I guess I'm really looking at, and this is something you can probably just think on and get back in response probably to all of us, and that is, you gave one issue, particularly yours on the move for deregulation, but I think Ms. Jackson just mentioned, this is a municipal-owned utility. It's the ratepayers who essentially own, these are the same constituents we have. And right now, because of the lack of dialogue, if you will, or the lack of conversation, there seems to be a big disconnect between the constituent / ratepayer / so it seems like there's this one step removed. And I think that's what's causing a huge disconnect internally, and I think that's where I believe we need to get back to, and I agree with you, Ms. Jacobson, that you addressed that fairly well. So I look forward to that particular, whether or not it comes in the form of a change in ordinance or an amendment or just in better dialoguing with getting that communication. Thank you.
Two, and then I'm gonna shift over to ML&P. Mike?
Mr. Chairman, I understand we're short on time. I have a lot of questions, but
We're gonna have
obviously
to have another work
work
session, we know
session.
that.
I'll just make a very quick comment to thank you all for coming here. It was very informative. It's not surprising for me to hear, your kudos to management and how the utility is run. As the utility analyst for the Assembly, that was always my impression, even before we changed this title. But it's quite fascinating for me to hear that in some ways this utility is meeting or exceeding performance by some of the biggest multinational corporations in the world who have some of the best management expertise on the globe at their command. And that's something that at the very least we can't tinker with that. We can't lose that. But I appreciate you coming. I appreciate you hearing that. I have a lot of questions about deregulation, but we don't have time for that now. So hopefully we'll get to that at another work session. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Mr. Mayor, final comment. What's your position on this deregulation or getting rid of the board?
But, there's good issues were raised today, and I think the board did a great job. It is a little bit different between the two utilities. I think that was a good point to be made because they're not the same. One definitely is in a more charged political atmosphere than the other. What we're looking at, though, as an administration, and when Patrick brought this forward, we started doing some due diligence in terms of what would this mean to our goals of greater efficiency for the administration. And believe me, we are committed across every sector of the municipality to find better efficiencies and save both the ratepayers and property taxpayers money where we can and still deliver great service. And that is our mission. And we've already, I think, accomplished a checklist of 8 or 10 things that we're very, very proud of. But when we look system-wide, I think what Jennifer was alluding to is that there's opportunities even within our enterprise activities, whether it's, for example, in the IT world, where if you can consolidate servers, if you can have virtualization consistent across the board, if you don't have to have different licenses and fees for every unit buying their own software. Human relations alone, we've got disconnects in compensation management. We've got disconnects in how the union rules are interpreted in the personnel rules, and we'd like to get those consistent. So under one contract, everybody is actually working and interpreting things the same way. Same thing in the legal world. We've got a bit of an inconsistency in how legal issues are handled. Accounting, transaction functions can certainly be consolidated and save money. Purchasing, there's just almost every area of the city, if we can find ways to consolidate and achieve efficiency, we want to do it. And that's not to say that the utility isn't being run efficiently, but as we look at the whole, are there ways to do things even better? And looking at the city as a whole, not in separate functions. So that's kind of the goal. Lucinda Mahoney, our CFO, is not here today, but she comes from the private sector in oil background, similar probably to you, Mr. Jacobson. And in her world, big companies with multiple units still have consolidated functions, whether it's ER, whether it's IT. They're not all separately done. Why? Because in the private sector, that's an efficient way to do it. So
Absolutely.
That's why we're looking at it. And when Patrick introduced this, that's been our process is, okay, in what areas of government do we think that there might be ways to do things more efficiently and save money? And that's kind of our goal.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate you being here. We're gonna probably have to have another work session, so we'll be in touch with you.
We would welcome it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Because we have probably a couple hours more questions that no one got to answer. So.
Yeah, I was here 2 hours, Mr. Chair.
What?
Sorry, 2 hours.
2 hours,
5 minutes
okay.
doesn't do this.
Thank you,
justice.
Harriet.
Thank you.
We can get ML&P up to the table, I'd appreciate it. Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
I was raised on a well, no fluoride.
I did that once.
They should spend some time to look at redoing their regulatory structure.
You did that really well. Sorry.
Sit down to the table, gentlemen. Okay.
Mr. Posey, you gonna join us at the table? You want me to, Mr. Chairman? Charles, you gonna join us at the table?
Charles and Mr. Hall, Ms. Hall. You want to talk for a minute first?
Yeah, we're gonna talk, let these guys start.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, distributor.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll make it. We'll make it.
Chairman, just for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Posey. Do you want to identify the members of your board that are here?
Yes, Robert Shake, Chairman of our Finance Committee, and Chairman of the Board, Johnny Gibbons. And then we'll be joined with another former Assembly member, Charles Wolforth, and Helena Hall. So we're prepared to more answer questions, give you some facts and figures. Since this is going to go a second time, because we are at some kind of time pressure here. What I have provided to you is something that I don't think was ended up in your budget package, but you have to know that ML&P's last audited financials is a great piece of paper with some great numbers in it as to the performance of this utility as opposed to any other utility in the state. But what I wanted in the color piece, I don't like to provide color pieces, but in this case it's important for you to know that for the last several weeks, we were before the RCA and RAPA, and the 60 to 70% of those numbers that you see that represents $16.3 million as a transfer to the city for this year, 2011 budget, is going to be, it is threatened because between RAPA and the military being our largest customer, RAPA being the group that the State Attorney General who works before the RCA, they've represented that we don't have to pay, you shouldn't have to pay and charge them the dividend or the MUSA. You take those two numbers out and you subtract more than half, or more like about 3/4 of that. That's the battle that we've been fighting. That's the battle that my consultants, my senior staff, and I are working very, very hard on, night and day, 80-hour weeks. The hearing is scheduled week after next, starting, because we weren't able to get closure with them on settling this out. It is a big, big deal. You add that to what AWWU is fighting, because what they did is on the MUSA, they brought us back in on the MUSA battle that all of you know a little bit about, or a lot about. And those are huge numbers, because as you know, our payments were brought under the tax cap. And if they go away, it is a tax increase. And that's the most serious thing before us today. This is the kind of stuff that we are. As AWWU said, this is a complex business. I am an ex-ARCO guy in oil and gas. We have gas operations, water operations, a water division. We have a hydro group. We take billions of molecules of gas and take them into billions of electrons and we sell them. And we do all that at a profit and pay the city. This board can tell you how complex that is because they've been down to Bradley Lake, they've been over to Beluga to see it. And they understand how complex it is and they work with us every day in making sure that we make the right moves on it. So other than that, I will leave it to my board chairman and the other commissioners board members to talk to you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And other assembly members, as chairman, I don't take a position one way or the other on whether or not the Title 32 should be repealed. Our board has not, as a whole, taken a position on that issue. So I'll make that clear up front for you. There'll be various opinions among the board members. My question, I guess, or clarification that I would seek is that after reviewing the memo from Assemblyman Flynn, because I wasn't quite clear on the direction. Initially in the memo, it indicated there was a repeal, but further down, it kind of indicated some characteristics that were still similar to a governing board. So I'm not quite sure, and maybe someone can give me some clarification on the direction that the ordinance, whether the assembly would want to go.
Okay. Charles? Jennifer, sorry.
I just was going to say, as a co-sponsor with Mr. Flynn on this, his intent, and I actually saw the letter about the same time you did. We discussed it and then he sent it out. And but the intent was there's a lot of things that are working because of Title 31 and 32. And we want to glean as much of the positive out of your boards as possible. So that was, so that might have been the mixed message, but it's not, we want to make sure that whatever board function or whatever board design we come up with, we get the best out of it, as best can. Nothing's perfect in politics, but.
Thank you.
I guess Mr. Shake is here as our vice president or chair? Treasurer. Treasurer, right. And Helena Hall, another board member. We have 9 members on our board. I appreciate what Chairman Gibbons said about the fact that we haven't taken a position on the ordinance. I want to present a point of view that I think I share with Helena and also with Mark Wigan, who's a board member who's absent, is that this board concept really has not come together at MLMP. I think that my understanding of AWWU is that essentially it's worked pretty well over there. But at MLMP, I think that it failed to gel, and there's a lot of reasons that we could talk about for that. My background is, of course, I've sat on at the table from your side. I also worked with Mayor Begich on utility issues as a consultant when we were talking about the merger of Chugach and MLMP, and wasn't really involved in the board structure being created, but certainly have some knowledge of that. And then, as some of you know, I was the chair of the ATU committee back in the day when we decided to sell that entity, and I also covered the creation of that authority. That authority was created as, in the charter, as truly separated from the municipality. The power that the assembly had over it was essentially just to list here reports annually, and the mayor had 0 power over it. So it was functioning as a separate business that the municipality owned. And what we have here is an entity where we have a board which is given certain powers subject to a transition process, and the decisions that are made by any business are delegated to it only in certain degree. So I don't know how familiar you all are with Title 32, but we think of ourselves as a board that's running a business, but we don't have final say over capital decisions. We can't borrow money or make major capital decisions, and we don't have authority over labor. We can adopt some rules, and we don't have the ability to hire and fire a general manager. So these, for I think anybody would say, these are sort of some of the major areas where you would need to have control if you were really to say you were running a business. And so what's happened is, as time has gone by over the last 2 years, is that we have, in my belief, have really not figured out how this entity is supposed to work. And the result, therefore, is that I think it's unclear to MLMP's staff exactly who they're working for. And I think from discussions our board has had, it's unclear to us exactly who we're working for. I mean, officially, the owner of MLMP is the municipality of Anchorage, and the assembly is the governing body of the municipality of Anchorage. So, for example, if you send us a resolution and say, we want you to do thus and such, does that mean that we're obliged to do that? Does it mean we take that under advisement and pursue it? There's difference of opinion at the board as to what our role is in that situation. Then there's also the many hot political issues that surround energy. And how do we deal with those? Are we the policymaker on those? Should we be receiving policy and then carrying it out? What's the general manager's role? Should he be answering to the mayor in terms of his policy decisions? Should he be coming, is it just another layer of management where we're sort of adding in our views? I just want to, so I'm talking, I want to make very clear that I think you've got an excellent staff at MLMP, and you've got a fantastic board, which is really a high-powered group of people and works well together despite some very different points of view. So what I'm talking about is a structural problem in the way the ordinance is created. My advice would be, rather than to abolish it, is to create it through authority. But I don't think it's working as it is. So I have a couple of handouts I want to pass out, which I don't have enough copies of. Title 32 has certain actual requirements that it directs us to do. And this is purely my opinion, but sort of going through what we've done and what Title 32 directs us to do. A number of important items have not occurred. And one is this transition process, which really has not occurred. The next document is a timeline that we were provided, and some of those are not stapled, unfortunately, so make sure you get both pages on the timeline. After Title 32 was passed, the MLP staff created a timeline of what was supposed to happen as we essentially separated from the municipality and became our own business. And many of those things have not occurred. The reasons are various. I don't think there's any bad faith, but I think it really comes down to this structure that is very vague and very hard to define. So that's what I have, and I'd be happy to answer questions. And I know that other board members probably don't agree with what I have to say, but I just wanted to throw it out there and make that part of the discussion.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to add one thing. So I agree with what Charles said, and I think the points he raised, those are important points. But sitting here listening to the conversation about AWWU, if the issue that the Assembly and that people are concerned with is efficiencies, then, well, I agree with Charles that I don't think that the structure of Title 32 right now is working as effectively as it could. I don't think that abolishing the board is going to get you more efficiencies or going to make you more productive, spending less money. The whole point, in my mind, of Title 32 was this transition process, which was supposed to study what would make sense, the most financial sense for the utility as far as separating from the municipality. And what I understand is the history that triggered that was that there was a lack of efficiency, and there was a lack of MLMP being able to actually run its business and procure the equipment it needs and procure the services it needs and run the business in a way that will make it the most profitable for the owners, for the municipality of Anchorage. And so if efficiency is the goal, then I would say we should, AWWU has been in place a lot, their board has been in place a lot longer than ours, and I would say that we should allow us the additional time to move forward with the transition plan. The consultant that we had hoped to hire over a year ago should be hired, and we should look at what is the most efficient thing to do. Now, it might be that we want to expand that view, so it's not just what's the most efficient thing for the utility, but for the municipality and the utility together. But I work for a very large corporation that's in 50 states and 5 countries. And we had a big push about 5 years ago to move to consolidating everything. And what we learned in doing that was that when you consolidate just for consolidation's sake, you lose efficiency. We have now moved
to decentralization of many of our functions, because what we learned is when you have different businesses, having one procurement department does not work if you're doing 48 different businesses with 48 different procurement needs. It actually is more expensive than having 48 separate procurement departments. One of the things we hear repeatedly from our management is the difficulty they have getting what they need purchased and done. So I just wanted, if efficiency is the point, I say let's move forward with the process and look at what is the most efficient thing, but don't consolidate just for consolidation's sake.
We've got some questions from assembly members. Mr. Starr first, and then Jennifer. Mr. Starr?
Who actually supervises the general manager then? Mr. Wolford, if your statements were that, because I asked the city manager whether or not he did, and he says, no, the board does. So,
well, I mean, as a board, we've never adopted any policies for how we supervise the general manager. So we haven't adopted, like, what is his signature authority and what does he have to come to us for? We haven't adopted any reporting requirements as to what he needs to tell us about. I know that he is he serves at the pleasure of the mayor.
well, let me ask you this: why haven't you?
Well,
adopted the policies?
there has. I guess I'd say that's a long story. I have introduced
just your version of it.
I've introduced a couple of resolutions calling for that to be done that have been either deferred. There was one that was deferred until we did a strategic planning process. We did a strategic planning process that has not come to fruition or adoption. I also introduced a resolution calling for creation of policies, and that resolution was turned down. I mean, I'm sure everybody has their own valid point of view for why they vote the way they do. I think we're also in a political situation, frankly, where we have Begich appointees and Sullivan appointees, and I don't know why everything.
I'm absent of the knowledge of that, but you have regularly scheduled meetings with agendas. Is that not right?
Once a month, yes.
Yeah, and the chairman has the oversight of the agenda.
Correct.
Okay. That's all. Thank you,
Jennifer.
Utilities in this state they're interesting because we have a lot of them. For again, a very small population. And I've heard that we've actually been the joke of some utilities because of that. That being said, have you as a board discussed, as we've gone through the different talks of combining utilities, separating utilities, where MLMP would be, what would be the best way to tie MLMP up into a little box and make it presentable for some, it's not Gretzky anymore, and I know MLMP is not part of the new legislation effort by the other utilities, but
We talk a lot about that, I think. And certainly when Gretzky was going on, we talked a lot about that. And I think that the concern is that MLMP is very different from the other utilities, and we're not a co-op, which would be obviously one of the big differences. We also are financially a lot stronger than the other ones. And so when looking at forming Gretzky, I could say as a resident of the state of Alaska that having one utility, one rail belt utility would make a lot more sense than having the number of rail belt utilities that we do. But as a board member of MLMP, I can assure you that every look I've had at this, it would not be better for MLMP to right now be consolidated with those other utilities and basically our balance sheet being used to support those other utilities. That wouldn't be the best use of this asset of the city of Anchorage. And so that has been our perspective. Now that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of ways for us to work with the other utilities to do joint projects. And I think actually the Architect, which is the Gretzky, the new Gretzky, Gretzky 2, the Architect, that I think that makes sense for the other utilities. And what MLP can do is we can contract with and work with, whether it's through power purchase agreements on projects. There are all sorts of different entities and legal ways for us to work with the other utilities on everything from transmission to building of the large projects, which won't require MLMP to lose its tax exempt bonding abilities, that won't put your asset at risk with those other utilities.
Jennifer, anything else? Ernie? Elby?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say thank you for your presentation, and thank you to Mr. Posey and your staff for a job well done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, your comments on this proposed ordinance?
Sure. And similar to the comments on the previous one, what we're looking at are ways to be efficient. And we don't consolidate for the sake of consolidation. That's not efficient, it's not cost saving. And like you said, in a 50-state company, they probably proved not to work. We're obviously not a 50-state company. We're a fairly small city with a couple of enterprise activities that if there can be consistency, as we've mentioned before, in the way we deal with labor, the way we deal with construction, the way we deal with IT, and achieve savings for either ratepayers or taxpayers, that's our mission. And we, to Mr. Wolforth's comments, he's probably right that there is probably a new direction coming from a new administration, which is perfectly normal. And you do have a mixed board. And quite frankly, we, in coming in, wanted to really take a look at whether or not fully transitioning into an authority made sense or not. And we're wrapping our hands around that. I think as AWW mentioned, this is a very, very highly charged, if you'll excuse the phrase, political arena in the electrical industry. And there's, I think, a perception or maybe even a need that we're seeing to be more nimble politically in this, and sometimes working through a board that has some authorities can actually slow that process down and maybe not truly reflect the political desires of the administration, when right now I think it's really important that we be right on top of the political decisions being made, because they do affect the utility directly. And we're obviously a key player in this whole thing, and maybe the key player. And so it's important for us to make sure that policy-wise, we are directing the policy of something so important. And I think that AWW made a good case for actually considering these separately, Mr. Chairman. I think the Assembly would probably be wise to do that. I think they do have different issues. But one way or the other, whether we work with them as an authority or back into the fold of government, our goal, again, is just simply we want to do business better, more efficiently, consistent labor rules, consistent management practices, so that everybody knows, no matter what union you work for, you know what the work rules are, the personnel rules. And I didn't mention it the first time, but the other thing, and I think one of the members touched on it, is that right now the public, essentially when anything goes wrong in the city, whether it's a utility or whatever, they don't know that there's an authority directing these things. They call the mayor's office. Why are my rates going up? And they call their assembly members. And right now, you're buffered from that technically, but you're not buffered from it in public perception. And so, it's one of those things, if you're going to take the heat, maybe you better have the authority to make decisions. So, something to think about.
Chairman, I know on that.
I know, I just want to get to you in a second. I just want to clear up one thing. Mr. Posey is not supervised by the board. He's not supervised by the city manager. He's supervised by you, is that correct?
No, that's incorrect, sir.
Okay, who supervises Mr. Posey? Because we started out with that discussion.
Through the chair of the executive committee, yes.
But it's supervision without the ability to terminate.
Yeah,
both. Not that we want to get rid of Jim.
But no, but I think it's an important point.
And this is not different.
Who is it?
I'm 65. It's a very important point.
This is not different in either utility. They serve at the will of the mayor, both Mr. Primo and Mr. Posey. If they are, if they retire, if they leave, or if I say thank you for your service, the board recommends 3 names to the mayor for a replacement.
Because there seemed to be some confusion going on when the question was asked by Mr. Starr.
I just wanted
Charles,
to
quick
respond
question
to the
for you.
mayor.
I'll go to you, but I want to ask you one specific question.
I just wanted to respond to the
Wind
mayor because
power.
I wanted to make sure that it's understood that I'm not disagreeing with your point of view. I think one of the keys to a sort of the Alaskan way of doing government is matching up accountability and responsibility in the same person. And that is where I think this model has got a problem, because it disperses accountability and responsibility among all these different people, and nobody knows exactly who's the boss.
Yeah.
So I think that's why my point is either break it off completely or bring it in closer. And that's my view.
Now, we had a discussion yesterday with Siri relative to wind power at Far Island, because they've been trying to get a response out of ML&P to get that project started. Now, we were told by the chairman that you guys had extensive discussion on the wind power issue with Siri. Charles, have you been to those meetings?
Which meetings?
The board chairman yesterday told the three of us that you guys have had extensive meetings on Far Island with wind power and MLNP.
We had a meeting where Siri presented to us, and we had some give and take, and then we've had a series of executive sessions, which I'm not at liberty to disclose, was discussed.
So you have had meetings on it, though?
And didn't you guys also have an independent consultant examine the project as well?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
Integration study.
Integration
study. Right.
The integration study?
Yes,
Right.
flow process.
Like we have a process here. Yes.
Paul?
Okay, well, first of all, I came in with one mindset as to what I believed and coming away with a much better information and education through this conversation. And I think, as we said it earlier, they would bear out a much longer discussion or work session on this particular issue as well. I firmly believe that the board should have the opportunity, the time to work through the plans that were identified. Mr. Wolf, thanks for pinpointing these out, because I think this is very informative in and of itself. And along the lines of what the chairman was saying, that when we come into this, I'm actually a consumer at both Chugach and MLNP. So I have a home in both locations at Brenville. And I see the differences, and they're stark. There are differences. And as far as rates go, pretty competitive. I have no complaints there. Service-wise goes, customer service is very good. Always been very responsive at the utilities. And I see the difference. I think MLNP has a position of strength, much like, unlike, I don't know where the comment came from earlier, but I see us as an asset and a definite strength of MLNP, and I believe we should use that and better foster both the management and the direction and the goals and the strategies of MLNP as an entity and a utility. But here's where I think our biggest challenge is for this particular utility, and that is, as we hear about, and I know we've got trillions of cubic feet of natural gas all over the state. We've got all sorts of coal. We've got hydroelectric. We got wind coming in. It's here. It's there. And that's where we, as an entity, need to be looking, because it's not just one single thing. I mean, it's the old adage of, if you always do what you've always done, expect different results. That's the definition of insanity. We're just not going to go there. We really need to be on the forefront, and I think it's problematic and more of a bigger challenge for this board, your board, if you can't even get to the addressing of what's critical in your operation. So I'd urge you and challenge you to continue on with this direction and build that team stronger so that we can get there. And I look forward to the opportunity for the future to try to work through these challenges as well together, and better communication. Much better. Thank you.
Questions from other assembly members? Anything?
Mr. Trainee, if I could just just a closing comment. As referenced by our chair, we're, as a body, we're neutral on the recommendation we're discussing here, but I want to assure, which I really don't have to, but I do in my role as treasurer, extremely strong utility, extremely well-run utility. We should all take great pride in what we have with MLNP. This is my second time around with MLNP. Previous administrations, I was appointed some years ago. I kind of hidden long enough, but this is my second term around. When I served before, it was as a commission. And I can say from experience that we did some very effective things through that in the early 90s. And I found my experience there to be fruitful, and one that my colleagues and I took very seriously, as we do today. We have a lot on our plates, but we are, again, blessed to have the utility and be in the position that we are today. And I think dialogue like this, and coming into the private sector myself, obviously efficiencies are our goal. So I think it's important we're all focused on this, and I appreciate the honor of speaking to you today.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Jim.
Just one more point.
Yes, sir.
As far as the organization is concerned, governance structure is concerned, I want the Assembly to be very cognizant of that. This utility is getting ready to go out again, probably in the not too distant future, for another bond issue. And one of the things that is important to us, the utility and the city, is some semblance of continuity as far as the ability to get decent rates in that bond issue. So I want you to just be cognizant of that.
Jim?
I just wanted to let the Assembly know that I have been blessed with not one, not two, but three former assembly members. And the one who's sitting in the back is Ted Carlson, who all of you and I've known for many, many years, Bob Bell, as well as Charles. So you can imagine, given the backgrounds of all three, how vigorous the discussions are at times on all of the issues we've talked to.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure seeing you today.
Quick
Yes,
question.
ma'am.
Mr. Gibbons, I'm not sure what you meant when you said continuity. Are you talking specifically about this piece of proposed legislation?
Yes, in
Okay.
particular, yes.
Just checking.
Director Bonds.
Thanks.
Thanks for being here. We're done.
Let's take some time, I think. Mario, you're gonna use the overhead? So we may have to switch around and set up the computer in 10 minutes.
No, that was.
Ryan, hey, Ted.
During the time.
I know.
This is
having fun.
Well, I can tell about.
No,